Hi everybody. Today I want to talk to you about Rogerian argument. I want to give you an overview, kind of describe what it is, and then explain how it's useful and why it's so very important in today's world. So Rogerian argument comes from Carl Rogers, who was an American psychologist, and he describes the Rogerian argument as a means to have a discussion in order to find common ground. And that common ground concept is key to understanding what a Rogerian argument is. Rogers believes that in order to achieve tolerance of differing views, the parties have to find a mutual ground on which to build an understanding. And this concept is really key. You can see how, for example, in today's government, why a Rogerian argument, being able to create a Rogerian argument, is actually going to be really important for there to be any kind of success or movement, any kind of growth. So a Rogerian argument, the goal of a Rogerian argument is to create a situation conducive to cooperation. This may involve changes in both your opponent's image and your own. So in other words, you're going to work with your opponent to find a common ground, some point of your argument or the issue that you are writing about. You're going to find some basic element that both your opponent and you can actually agree on. And this means that you have to be flexible and that your opponent's going to have to be flexible and open. If you're not open to learning new things or looking at different perspectives, then you're not going to be able to create a good Rogerian argument. The Rogerian argument was made as a tool to promote tolerance without any guidelines provided as to what is acceptable. So you can create a Rogerian argument in just about any way that you can imagine. But the key, again, is finding common ground and avoiding new conflict. But pushing tolerance is really going to be extremely important to be successful. So an effective Rogerian argument forces the people involved to listen to each other and to explore carefully all of the options. It also downplays emotional appeals and concentrates instead on objective representations of the various points of view. And so, in other words, you're not going to, well, smart people believe this, or if you love children, you're going to do this. You're going to take that kind of emotional appeal out of your argument and really just focus on logic and reason to make your argument. So the Rogerian argument attempts to accomplish three goals. To convey to the reader that he is understood. And when you see reader, you could say the opposition. So to convey to the opposition that I understand where you're coming from. I get what you're saying. And then to delineate the area within which he believes the reader's position to be valid. So I believe that you make a good point when you say this. And then to induce the reader to believe that the author and the writer, or the author and the reader, share similar moral qualities. We all want to do what's best for children. We all want to do what's best for our country. We have the same values of honesty and integrity and goodwill and aspirations. We want our children to succeed. We want our government to succeed. So those are common goals that you have, or common desires that you share. So these are just a kind of a overview of how you can format a Rogerian argument, or some of the elements of a Rogerian argument. Now I break this down into depth in your outline of the Rogerian argument, which I'm going to go through next, but I just want you to kind of get a broad general idea of the Rogerian argument. So the first thing you're going to do is introduce your topic. And you want to introduce it as a problem rather than an issue. And a problem, there's a little bit of a difference between a problem and an issue. Yes, this is an issue, but a problem is something that you want to solve. We like to solve puzzles. We like to fix problems. So a problem is something that people generally want to make better or improve. Regardless of your position on the problem, you want to solve the problem. The next thing, and this is key, is to make a fair statement of the opposing position. So in other words, what does your opposition say? What is their perspective? And you want this to be really honest and straightforward. You don't want this to be colored by your own position or wants or desires. You want this to be straightforward. This is what my opposition is saying. And what you're doing is you're trying to convince your opposition that you understand their perspective. You see exactly where they're coming from. You're not trying to misrepresent them and you haven't misunderstood their main points. And then the next is you want to say a statement of context in which that position may be valid. So you want to explain that you understand why they're looking at it from their perspective and how that can be a valid perspective. Okay? It doesn't have to be the only valid perspective, but that their position has validity, that it has a point and a purpose. Finally, or next, you want to make a fair statement of your own position. Again, you're just saying, this is where I'm coming from. You start off with, I see where you're coming from. Your next is, this is where I see you're coming from, and then this is my position. This is how I'm talking about it. So your goal is to get your readers to understand your position fairly. So I've looked at you, I've presented your position fairly. Now I'm presenting my position fairly. So we both understand each other's position. And next, you want to explain why your position is valid. This is how I'm thinking about it. This is why it's the right way to think about it. And what you're trying to do here is to get your opposition to look at the problem from a different perspective, to see your perspective. So you have given the opposition that courtesy. You have begun by giving the opposition that courtesy. You have looked at their position fairly and honestly and openly, and you see from their perspective where they're coming from. So now you're asking them to look at your perspective and give you the same courtesy. And then finally, you want to talk about how a statement of how your readers would benefit by at least adopting some elements of your position. So maybe they're not going to take every point, but they're going to take some points because you've made valid points that address their concerns as well. That's what happens when you find common ground, is you find that place where both you and your opposition can agree that it's a problem and can start building on ways to find a solution to that problem. So you're trying to transform your position from a threat to a promise. I promise that we will help children by doing X, or I promise that we will improve the gridlock in our government by doing Y. So by doing this, again, you're building on common ground and you're making your argument valid and welcoming the conversation. And that's really the key. If you're going to find any change or make any real change in any kind of policy or understanding anything, in order for change to occur, you've got to have common ground. You've got to have some basis of building, some block to build upon that everyone can agree upon. So if you have questions about this, after you've looked at the other two videos, post them in the I have a question forum, and I will be happy to answer your questions.